Thank you, Ned, and thanks to all of you for helping deliver Pennsylvania to Donald Trump. What a wonderful thing that was. So Donald Trump dropped everything to come to Phyllis Schlafly's funeral. It was after Labor Day. It was just as the campaign was getting into high gear. You can imagine how many other things Donald Trump had to do, all the other things he could have done. He rearranged his schedule. He flew out, especially to St. Louis. We moved the funeral for my mother to the Basilica, one of the largest churches, I think it is the largest church in St. Louis, one of the most beautiful in the Midwest. Thousands poured into the pews for my mother and for Donald Trump to give a eulogy there. And as we're getting ready, we were on a tight schedule, and there's Ned talking to Donald Trump about Pennsylvania. And I'm like, come on, we got to go. We got this funeral starting at 2 o'clock, and it's going right on schedule. We got to go, we got to go. And I had introduced Donald Trump, and Ned was conversing there with Donald Trump just before we went on the altar there. And I stood before the thousands of people, and I said that Donald Trump came out here with his wife, Melania, made a special trip, flew out just for this. But Donald Trump said he wanted to be careful that he was not a disruption to the funeral, that he did not want to cause anything disruptive to this solemn occasion. And I let him know that to Phyllis Schlafly, politics was never a disruption. And there's nothing more she could have wanted than to have Donald Trump there giving the eulogy at her funeral, and he did, and we appreciate that very much. Then it went into October, and the polls were rolling against candidate Trump, and it looked pretty bleak. He was down by 10 points, 12 points in some polls in sort of the first, second week of October, and I was giving speeches, and I said this in a speech, that something is going to happen. The way my mother passed away with her charm and her cheer, I spoke to her the day before she passed away. She was smiling as she always was. She passed away like she was on a mission. And something is going to happen here. And she's going to be lobbying the man upstairs to do something here. And the day after I said that in a speech, James Comey of the FBI sent this bizarre letter to Congress saying he's reopening the investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails. And it threw the liberals in a tizzy. They couldn't understand it. I don't know that it's really been fully explained to this day, that whole sequence of that letter by James Comey, and then he sent another letter a couple weeks later to try to patch it up just before the election, but that made it worse. Made it look like it was just the fix was in, and there was something there, and then they covered it up. And some of the people in Hillary's camp say that it was that letter from James Comey that flipped the election. I know that's what 538 says. I don't know. I think it was the divine hand of providence coming in and giving our country one more chance, which is what Phyllis said back a year before. Said we got one last chance here, one last chance for our country. And that's Donald Trump. And so we got to get behind him, and we did. And thank you, Pennsylvania, for putting him over the top. I want to have some fun and just tell a few anecdotes about my mother, and then as she would want us to do, then I want to get into something substantive that we all need to do, and that's very important this time. But first, a few anecdotes to lead up to it. A conservative friend of mine in St. Louis, his father passed away recently. As he was going through his father's attic, he found an old photograph of his father on a date with my mother when she was 17 years old. And if you send me an email, I'll send you that photograph. I'll email that to you later today, because there's my mother, 17 years old, and on one hand, she's like any other teenager. She's wearing bobby socks. She's on a date. On the other hand, you can sort of see that sort of charm in her eye and that determination that she was going to do something good for our country. And I've got into a debate with this fellow as to whether they're holding hands in the photograph. You can't really tell, and he's going into forensics now to get in there. Oh, they're holding hands. They're holding hands, so that's kind of funny. She was going to Washington University at the time, and there's a story behind that. She had a full scholarship to college. She's from a poor family. Her father was unemployed. He lost his job in the Depression. They had no money growing up. And she got a scholarship to go to college, and she was on a full scholarship at another school. And this is what my mother was like. Even though she was on a full scholarship to another school and getting A's, getting top grades and everything, it wasn't challenging enough for her. She gave up the scholarship, transferred to Washington University for a more rigorous curriculum, got a 48-hour-a-week job test firing ammunition during the war to pay her way through a more difficult school. She did stuff like that. And then years later, Washington University finally gave her an honorary degree in addition to the college degree she earned, and she also earned a law degree there in her 50s. It's another thing she did, went to law school in her 50s while she was active in politics because she felt that would give her more credibility. They were knocking her during the ERA fight that she wasn't an attorney. Okay, fine, I'll become an attorney, and then you can't criticize them for that. They gave her an honorary degree in addition to that, and the liberal professors there organized a protest against her and got some students to stand up and turn their back on my mother while she was receiving the honorary degree. And it caused quite a stir. And my mother, of course, was used to that. And after it was over, a reporter put a microphone in her face and said, "Boy, that was pretty insulting, wasn't it?" Trying to elicit an angry response from my mother, which any of us in this room, we would say something angry. We're human beings. Mother was, but she always was ready for those what she would call them bad pitches from the press. And she was ready for it, and so the reporter said, "What do you think of that, them turning their backs on you while you got that honorary degree?" And she said, with her charm, she said, "I'm not sure they're mature enough to graduate." And she always was ready for questions, the nasty questions. She said to me once that Babe Ruth, who was the big baseball hero when she was growing up, it's her era, she said they never threw him a good pitch. All his home runs were off of bad pitches. And you got to take that bad pitch from the media, from the other side, and you got to hit the ball out of the park. That's what you have to do. That's what Babe Ruth did. He could do it in baseball. We have to do it in politics. So these are inspiring stories. Just sitting here listening to the other speakers, it reminds me just more and more stories. I could tell them all day. We had John Gizzi talking about Ron Ziegler, the press secretary for Nixon. Well, I was down at Disney World with my mother when I was 11 years old. She took us all down there. That was back when Disney was conservative. And, and we were on the Jungle Cruise. And the Jungle Cruise, the tour guide has to put on quite a show. And, oh, there's the alligators. Look out, look out. There's the hippopotamus. Oh, no, and the water's spouting. And they have to put on quite a show for to entertain the people on the boat. And my mother always thinking about politics. She said, "You see what that guy's doing? That's how Ron Ziegler got the experience to be press secretary for Richard Nixon." True story. True that my mother said that, and it's true that that's how Ron Ziegler got his experience. Congressman Barletta was up here just a few minutes ago. I met him in the hallway, and my mother backed Congressman Barletta back from the very beginning, when no one was on our side on this immigration fight. My mother was there writing columns about it. Then Congressman Barletta, when he was mayor, Mayor Barletta was like the second or third person on our side of immigration, and now, of course, Donald Trump and half the country's on our side on immigration. But first it was my mother, and then it was Mayor Barletta. And when his case went up to the Third Circuit, my mother had me write an amicus brief in support of Mayor Barletta when it went into the court system and went on up. So my mother was ahead of the time in so many ways, and she was out there in front, the first one. and then the rest of us sort of catch up. And so we've got her body of work to look at, and she's left us that. Probably she's written more than Shakespeare did in plays. It's all there. We're putting it together. We're making it available. We've put some of her books online. You can purchase all of her writings, all her columns. We're putting them online and stuff. And we can go back and look at what she said, and it's still true today. It just rings so true. It's hard to find anything that she was wrong about. It was an intuition she had. It was a mixture of sort of logic and principles and faith, and sort of all stewed together, her own life experiences, growing up poor, working her way through college. She was just right on all these issues. And something she wrote about a decade ago was the problem of the court system. And she wrote a book called The Supremacists. And I've posted it online. So you can go, if you have a smartphone, you can look at it right now. You can go to the website pseagles.com. That stands for Phyllis Schlafly Eagles, plural.com. And you'll see there, one of the first links there is a link to The Supremacists, which is the book. And I looked at the book. I looked at what she said 10 years ago. 10 years ago, she said this. And I'll just read from the very beginning of the book, just a few sentences here. What is the future of self-government in America? Will we continue to be the world's greatest self-governing people, a land of liberty and of the prosperity that flows from freedom? Or will we, like so many others, allow ourselves to be ruled by a small band of elitists who pretend to be wiser than the rest of us and force their policies upon us? Next sentence. Our American institutions and culture are being undermined today by judicial supremacists. There it is. Just as you said, there it is. It's right there. That's exactly what's happening. And our side has not yet fully woken up to it. My mother was talking about this 10 years ago, trying to wake us up then. Some of us are starting to wake up to it. Donald Trump is starting to wake up to it. His staff is starting to, but they're not there yet. They're not there yet. Unfortunately, they still think that they can get the courts to rule in their favor on something. The courts are not going to rule in favor of anything that Donald Trump does. That's the reality. His agenda will be blocked at every turn by the ACLU and liberal mayors and governors and whatnot filing suit, picking the courts to file it in, and blocking everything Trump does. Okay? They've already done it multiple times. And I saw this comment. I mean, I read her book, and I talked to the Trump transition team back in November, spoke to them. I said, watch out. They're going to file suits and block everything you do. All your plans, they're all going to get blocked. I said, don't worry about it. We got it taken care of. We've lawyered up. We got lawyers on it. Lawyers aren't going to help. Lawyers aren't going to help because the judges, they're judicial supremacists. They're going to rule against you every time. You get the best lawyers in the world. It's still, the courts are going to rule against you. And the book explains why. It goes on. A few paragraphs later, let me read one more sentence to you from the book, where it says, and this was the way my mother would inject a little bit of humor into it, textbooks still say that we have 3 balanced branches of government, but textbooks are badly behind the times because one branch has assumed authority over the other 2. The judiciary has assumed authority over the presidency, over Congress, over everything in the legislative branch, over everything in the executive branch, over everything in the states. The federal judiciary has assumed supremacy. This is what we've got to address. This is what we have to stand up against. This is what we have to develop a strategy to defeat. Now, you can summarize all this if your eyes have glazed over and you say, well, I'm not an attorney. And here's the problem. If you're not an attorney, you say, well, I'm not an attorney. You gotta talk to attorneys about that. If you are an attorney, you've been brainwashed by the law schools and by our profession. I'm an attorney. And the better attorney you are, the more you've been brainwashed. So we got nobody who will just simply recognize that the judiciary is not supposed to be greater in power than the other two branches of government. Judiciary is not supposed to stop the president. And Alexander Hamilton spells this out in the Federalist Papers, Federalist number 78. He says judiciary, the federal judiciary, is, quote, the least dangerous, close quote, branch of government. You can shut them down. If they overreach, Mr. President, you can stop them. You don't enforce their orders. You don't enforce their orders. And this is Alexander Hamilton talking. Congress, you can stop them. You don't fund enforcement of their orders. You withdraw jurisdiction from them. The federal, like all branches of government, it will overreach until the other branches push back. And that's what we need to see. That's what needs to happen. President Trump has got to develop a strategy to push back. Congress has to develop a strategy to push back. There's no more of this judiciary being above the other two branches of government. No. They're co-equal. In fact, the federal judiciary should be less in power. All right, so if your eyes glazed over and you say, I can't follow that stuff, get to the bottom line here. Okay, I'll get to the bottom line. Roe v. Wade. There it is. Judicial supremacy. Overturn it. Roe v. Wade. Okay, if you're running for office and you're not in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade, we don't want you. Okay, we don't want you. If you want to be a judge, and you're not in favor of overturning Roe v. Wade, no, we don't want you. That is the ultimate in judicial supremacy, and it needs to be overturned. The mistake needs to be corrected. We need pro-life judges for American courts, which is what Trump campaigned on, and it's what he won on. Pro-life judges. Overturn Roe v. Wade. It's as simple as that. So, in 6 words, you can ask somebody to figure out if they're on our side on this issue or if they're going to let the federal courts run over everything, block all of Trump's agenda, keep illegal immigration flowing in the country. You notice how Congressman Barletta said the courts ruled against him. He wasn't able to win in the courts. He won everywhere else, but he wasn't able to win in the courts. Well, since when do a handful of unelected judges get to stop a man like Congressman Barletta, who's won election after election, who's doing everything he can to help our country, and these unelected judges are stopping him? That's not right. We know it's not right. So ask the judges, would you overturn Roe v. Wade? If the answer is yes, okay, we like you, we support you. Same thing we ask of political candidates. Are you pro-life? You're pro-life, we support you. You're not? No. Same thing. Would you overturn Roe v. Wade? All right, so that's what it comes down to. And that's what we have to do. And I believe the Trump team will have to recognize this, that they have to address judicial supremacy. And I think we're going to see a constitutional crisis of some sorts where ultimately President Trump is going to say, this is ridiculous. I do a travel ban. It was the first one was constitutional. They strike it down. I revise it. I make it much more narrow. They strike it down. I do it again. They strike it down. They strike this down. Now he's going to defund sanctuary cities through Jeff Sessions. My mother was very fond of Jeff Sessions. He's the Attorney General now. He was Senator of Alabama. Jeff Sessions, we're going to defund sanctuary cities, which is perfectly reasonable, completely constitutional, needs to be done. Courts are going to block it. Courts are going to block it. So there needs to be the executive standing up and saying, wait a minute, guys, The people voted for us. We are a branch of government, okay? Judiciary, fine. You can have your opinions. You can, you can put out your little opinions and stuff. You're a branch of government. You are the least dangerous branch of government. We're the executive. We're in the driver's seat. All right? So we're defunding sanctuary cities. You got it? We're defunding them. And that needs to be clearly stated. And there needs to be a stance, as prior presidents have done. Andrew Jackson did this. Abraham Lincoln did this. Even FDR was prepared to do this if the courts got in his way. So prior presidents have done this. You have to do it. Otherwise, that branch of government will overrun the other branches. So this is where we're headed. It's exciting times. If Phyllis were here to speak to you, she would urge you to read her book on this that she wrote 10 years ago to get us ready for it. She would thank you for all the great work you're doing. She'd thank you from the bottom of her heart, and she would urge you to keep up the fight. Thank you very much.